I don't have a good sign-on, so I just say something like, "Greetings! You're listening to Cantus Firmus at the Movies. My name is Cody Cook, and my guest is Bridget Nelson."
That sounds good.
Okay. Greetings. Greetings, you're listening to Cantus Firmus. Okay. Bridget is perhaps best known to the public for her work on the long-running and hilarious television series Mystery Science Theater 3000, where she was a writer and occasional actress, playing characters such as Mr. B. Natural. The conceit of the show, for those who are unfamiliar, perhaps a young Amish lad who's just begun his rumspringa and has somehow stumbled first thing onto this podcast, was that mad scientists sent a man into space against his will and forced him to watch bad movies, which he did, along with 2 adorable robots. As the characters watch said movies, they provide humorous commentary or riffing. Nowadays, she can be found providing Mystery Science Theater style comedy for Rifftrax. And the shorts and features she's riffed can be heard at rifftrax.com. That's rifftrax.com. I also highly recommend subscribing to her podcast instead of tweeting, which she performs with her husband, also of Mystery Science Theater and Rifftrax fame, Mike Nelson. Before we start on the film we're discussing, Bridget, which is Woody Allen's Crimes and Misdemeanors, I wanted to ask you a few questions related to both your career in the entertainment industry and your background as it relates to Christian faith, which are both relevant to what we do at the podcast.
So, okay, we're on the podcast right now. Okay,
oh gosh,
you're
yes.
doing awesome. Okay, great. I think you're very good at what you do.
We're going to do a trial run of the entire podcast. If it sounds good, we'll do that over again, word for word.
I'm a one-take wonder. Don't worry.
So my first question is, how did you find yourself on Mystery Science Theater 3000, and what was it like being involved in such an iconic series with so many funny people?
I found myself, hello listeners, I found myself on the show, it was like 1989, and I was doing stand-up comedy along with Mike was too, my husband, and just a whole bunch of different people. And Josh Weinstein, who was a writer on the show at the time, and my husband and I were all friends. And I told him, my boyfriend Mike can type like 100 words a minute. He's just like an amazing typist. So they hired him on as a typist. And he was just going in there and saying whatever they were saying. He was typing it. And of course, he started being funny. And then he just started writing jokes while, in between. And then pretty soon he was just in on things. And then we got married. And on our honeymoon, we were kind of like afraid that they would forget about him. So we came home early. Like, I'm back. Don't forget you gave me a job. And then about a year later, I started writing home scripts, just kind of because I had been around everything. And I was just kind of a natural choice. They had a couple other people submitting scripts, and I just kind of knew the system. So I started writing scripts at home. And then eventually they, hired me on as a writer in the actual writing room. So it was just real organic. I was kind of just around enough and kind of understood the sensibility. So it was an easy transition.
Right. So, and, at this time, I remember seeing an interesting ad for the club that Prince was kind of famously involved in, the 7th Street entry, where it was like in the course of a month, they were advertising Joel Hodgson and Prince, like, we're both doing something.
Yes.
And Joel Hodgson, of course, was the creator of the show. And so you were kind of in that sort of scene, hanging out with those sort of people, and just kind of fell sort of into that together.
Yeah, I was doing, Joel was already established, star in the sense that he'd been on Letterman and Saturday Night Live and all that. And Mike and I were, slumming on the open stages and stuff like that. So we wouldn't have been at a club at that point. We were working the small clubs at that point. So we weren't crossing paths as we were performing, but Joel was definitely around watching people perform and stuff. But we got to know him really more through just introductions of people like, hey, this guy's funny. Joel, that kind of thing. And then Mike just came in, as I said, came into the office to type. So I don't think Joel ever saw him like performing, but he saw me probably more.
Gotcha. So this is Minnesota, and you're a young woman who winds up working on this television show. So you're basically Mary Tyler Moore, right?
Basically, I am Mary Tyler Moore. Yes,
that's
my hair does flip like that, and but I don't have a Mustang.
Yeah. So now with the Minnesota thing, I remember when we chatted, kind of leading up to this, you said that you had a really cool Prince story, which I think this is the best place. It's not going to be relevant to anything else we discuss, So I thought I'd ask about that here.
Oh, but it is relevant.
Oh, okay.
So, yes. Okay, so when Mike and I were attending this church in South Minneapolis, and the pastor's friend, and his friend was also just, kind of an elder in the church doing everything. You know how that goes at a small church in a small congregation. And he lived kind of, those houses that are by the freeway, but the big wall is there.
Uh-huh.
But it was a really nice house, and but that's where he lived. And one day he was just hanging out in his house and knocking the door, and it's the two Jehovah's Witnesses, and they come in, and the one guy is talking a lot, and the other little guy is just sitting there agreeing with everything.
Mm.
And then all of a sudden, Joe, our friend, it dawns on him that it's Prince sitting in his living room, who's come to tell him about the Jehovah Witness lifestyle. And he recognized him, and, hey, you're Prince? And he said, yes, I am. And then they just talked a little bit more about Jesus. And he said, I'm not going to be a Jehovah's Witness, and here's why. And but Prince was pretty quiet, but they had tea, they talked a little bit. He had seen him in concert, he told them about that, and off Prince went into the night. And
Wow.
yeah, isn't that funny?
That is, I always like kind of wondered like if he really did that. I always felt like maybe they gave him a pass because he was Prince. Like, well, you're like one of the 144,000 or something, probably because you're Prince,
No,
so you don't have to.
no, he had to do it. And the thing was, it was hard for him to get by in a car, without. Yeah, he doesn't have his makeup and clothes on, but he still is the tiniest dude you've ever seen. So
Yeah.
you kind of know it's Prince when you see him. And people would spot him all the time riding his um, mountain bike around town, and people would just see him. He loved Minnesota. He was a true Minnesotan. His last name was Nelson.
Yes, that's true. That is true. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So you were dating Mike when you guys started Mystery Science Theater. At some point during that
Yes,
process,
I was not dating Prince. I was not dating
Yeah.
Prince.
Yes.
Okay, right.
So your maiden name is Bridget Nelson. Sorry, Bridget Jones. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Bridget Nelson now. I don't know why I said that. So your maiden name is Bridget Jones. So you got married early enough to save yourself from all the what would happen when the Renee Zellweger films took off. So there was no jokes about Bridget Jones's diary. You had to deal with.
No, there were so many. So when the show first started, I just kept Bridget Jones, mostly because I had a stack of headshots that I had just paid money for in those days. Photographs that was big stuff. And so I just kept it. And then the book came out, Bridget Jones's Diary, and all the women my age were reading it. It was very funny. But I started getting phone calls from, my mom's friends and things like, honestly, did you write that? I could just see you doing that,
Yeah.
No, the woman's from England. Her name is, and so no, it started pretty early.
Gotcha. So, but now that you're Bridget Nelson, have you ever been mistakenly booked for something, like people thought you were Brigitte Nielsen from Red Sonja? Does that happen?
Yes, all the time. Then people think that's funny. And but thank God that we look a lot different, and I generally wear about 100% more clothing than she does. So not too, but both people make both jokes. So I'm kind of stuck. And then Mike has the boringest name in the whole wide world, Mike Nelson. So we just did not win in the name department if you're going to be in show business.
All right, so just kind of maybe one more question related to Mystery Science Theater and Rifftrax, which what's one of your favorite riffs for a film or a short that you yourself wrote?
A line that I wrote?
Yeah.
Oh man. Oh, I have to think about it. Can we come back to it?
Sure, we can come back to it.
Textual, yeah, because it's all in context.
That's true. Yeah, you'd have to be like, so what's happening is Joe Don Baker is, yeah. So okay, gotcha.
Exactly. But my first line that found purchase and people laughed that hard at the writing room and then got in was in Ator, and there was a part when Ator's flying in. I forget what we call him, but I think it's Ator Thomas Johnson. You get down here this instant. I wrote that, and I remember being like, the writing room laughing and like, yay, and then it got in the script. So I remember thinking that was pretty cool.
Awesome. So now we're here to discuss, film. So we've talked about your kind of background in the entertainment industry. But there's also, we're sort of talking about it from a philosophical or theological standpoint. So I guess my question would be, what's your kind of journey been as regards to faith?
I was raised Catholic,
Mm-hmm.
and we were frequent churchgoers. We never missed. We were very. I wouldn't say that we were devout Catholics. People say that all the time, and I don't think they really. We were serious Catholics. My family was serious Catholics, and we did all the things they're supposed to do. And I went to Catholic grade school, high school, college, and was happy in my faith. And then, as many young people do, I began to drift away in my probably after college, kind of really lost my way. And then I started doing stand-up comedy. I met Mike. He was an atheist. I didn't really believe him. And when we got married and had kids, we still kind of we went to church, went to Catholic church. And then I had a real, like about, I don't know, 8 years into our marriage, 6, 7, 8, right in there, when you're kind of look at each other and go, oh my gosh, wow, we're going to do this, huh? For the rest of our lives. We got married relatively young, and the fun ends, and you look at each other and 2 kids and you think, ugh, are we going to make it? And I was right around that time that we just both had a born again experience in the true sense where, Jesus is my God. And I began to read our Bibles very seriously. And then Mike became a believer. And it was then I left the Catholic Church. I wouldn't say that I left for some big huffy puffy reason other than that Mike was becoming a believer. And I don't think you have to be a Catholic, and so we began attending a Presbyterian church and kind of went from there. Yeah. But it was definitely a born again experience for me. And it was like 3 months apart for us.
Wow.
Where we really turned and said, no, I really believe this. And if I really believe this, I just want to keep reading this word. I just want to keep reading this Bible. I love this. You just get hungry. You have a hunger and thirst for the word. And I think we both did.
Gotcha.
So at the same time. So that would have been in the middle of the show.
Oh, wow. So in the middle of the show, I'm trying to think, because there's a point in the show where, so Joel is like kind of the host early on, and then Mike sort of becomes like the main character at some point. So was that basically, was that before that happens, or try to think, have a sense of
yeah. That was Mike had been the host for a couple of years by the time that happened. Because
really?
I always forget. I mean, like I think Mike started hosting like in '93. And this probably didn't happen until like 96 or 7.
Okay. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So when I, was kind of young, so I was born in 87. So when I discovered Mystery Science Theater, it was, everybody kind of has maybe their favorite or whatever, but Mike was kind of my host. You know what I mean?
Right. Because you were, yeah. I get what you mean.
Yeah. So that's interesting. I wonder if that's something that, obviously he's playing a role. So, but it'd be interesting I wonder if that's something you could see watching the show. Like, oh, something seems a little different about Mike in this episode all of a sudden.
Yeah. You know what? I don't know. But I can speak to what you said about your host, because Roger Moore was my 007.
Yeah.
I mean, that was just, Sean Connery seemed like a really old guy by the time I was watching James Bond movies.
Yeah. Well, that's kind of it's slightly different, but for Ringo Starr is my wife's favorite Beatle, so it's kind of and somewhere out there, Zeppo is someone's favorite Marx brother.
Somewhere out there, yeah.
All right, so we discussed kind of doing this podcast and what film we might do. We mentioned a few, and this one was the one that you sort of chose to talk about. Why was this one that stood out for you?
Because I remember seeing it before I was a Christian, and I loved it so much. I just thought it was just his best movie, and I just loved it. And then several years after I saw it, and I thought, oh, well, I still like it. I like what it brings up, but I'm not very wise. I mean, he's the point of it, basically there is no God. What are things like without a God? Yeah, I agree. Yeah, you are right. And it's awful. But and then, so I kind of didn't like it. And now I suppose I've seen the movie about 8 times. And now in the other half of my life, I still think it's a good movie because it brings up big topics and interesting topics, which I don't think movies have for a long time. So even flawed thinking, unwise, whatever, way more interesting than most movies now.
Yeah, well, there's something kind of honest about it. I mean, obviously Woody Allen is an atheist, so he's not coming from a Christian perspective, but he manages to make a lot of points that, Christians would make about the problem of atheism, and he makes them in a very vivid kind of way.
Yeah, he's right.
So for those who haven't seen the film or haven't seen it in a while, I might give kind of a real basic plot overview. In the past, I feel like I spend too much time on this. So I'm going to try to do it kind of quick, and I won't really do like a beginning to end. I'll just kind of do the layout. And then as we talk, we'll probably spoil elements. So if somebody is listening and hasn't seen it, you might want to watch it first. But so basically, there are a few main characters. Martin Landau is the Dr. Judah Rosenthal. He's a successful ophthalmologist, I believe, or optometrist, one of the two.
Ophthalmologist. Linus gets that mixed up all the time too. Remember?
Oh yeah. So anyway, so Landau's playing Judah Rosenthal, successful ophthalmologist, fairly prestigious, and he's carrying on an affair with a woman named Dolores Paley, who is played by Angelica Houston. She threatens to talk to his wife about it, and he fears that he'll lose his family and reputation, and he realizes that the only way out is to have her killed. And there's a B story that's happening. Second story, where Woody Allen plays this unsuccessful independent filmmaker named Cliff Stern, whose television producer brother-in-law offers him an opportunity to direct a documentary film about himself. Allen feels conflicted. He needs the money, but will it be at the cost of sacrificing his integrity to do a film about somebody who he thinks is kind of an idiot? And the brother-in-law is played by Alan Alda.
Alan Alda. Mm-hmm.
Yep. And we also have Mia Farrow in there as someone who's kind of a love interest of Alan. He's married, but the marriage is not doing well, and he's sort of falling for this woman who's, I guess she's a producer of this show that they're doing the documentary for. And there's also, interestingly enough, Sam Waterston and Jerry Orbach from Law and Order are both in it as well. So that's kind of the basic idea. So you sort of have these sort of two characters who are both dealing with some kind of a moral dilemma, and have to sort of make some kind of a choice related to moral integrity.
Right. And they're kind of related. Like Sam, the rabbi, is the brother of Woody Allen's sister. He's married. And then Martin Landau and Jerry Orbach are brothers.
Yes, that's correct. So yeah, there's the elements sort of the brothers who come from different perspectives, and yeah. So there are like a handful of themes that kind of run through the film. I think that the main one has to do with this issue of final justice, which I'm not referring to a film that's worked by Mystery Science Theater there, but this idea of, is there justice ultimately, that kind of runs throughout it. And so, the spoiler alert is that Landau's character does decide to have this woman killed. And before he does that, he's, I guess, maybe an agnostic or an atheist. He's not really sure about the significance of God. He comes from
he brings it up at the beginning of, is that okay that I've okay. So he brings it up at the beginning of the movie. He's giving a speech, and he talks, and he's an ophthalmologist, so he's an eye guy. So he talks about his dad was a rabbi, and he says, always would tell him, Judah, the eyes of God are on us all. And then he said, I wonder what are God's eyes like. And then he said, I always imagined them to be extremely penetrating or something like that. So he is molded by a religious family. I don't think there's any getting out of it for him to begin with. He is right.
But he kind of does this transformation where it's not necessarily clear how significant God is to him earlier on. And then once he has this woman killed, he has this sort of change where suddenly he becomes very aware of the weight of his guilt, and he feels like, God's eyes are on him. He has his brother arrange this hit. His brother isn't nearly as prestigious situation. When his brother calls him, to tell him what happens, or maybe it's at a later point, but he says, God have mercy on us. And there's this moment where he's talking to his wife later, and he's like, just kind of, you have this idea that for weeks or months or whatever after, he does this, he's just kind of stuck in himself in his head.
Right.
And there's this moment, I think he's up to dinner with his wife, and he just doesn't seem to be engaged in the conversation. And then he suddenly says, I believe in God, because without God, the world is a cesspool.
Right. He just blurts it out like we do, your sin will surely find you out, kind of a thing. But earlier, if you don't mind going way back to the beginning of the movie, he's this eye doctor, and he's checking the eyes of the rabbi. So the rabbi, the kind of the thing that's going on is the rabbi is going blind, but he's wise. Martin Landau is seeing, but he's unwise.
Wow, I didn't catch that.
Yeah, how don't you think? Because it starts, and then the movie starts, and it's dark, and in the darkness, that Martin Landau, the doctor, says, "I need to tell you something. Can I confide in you?" So it's in the dark. He's in the dark. He tells him, and then I the part I love is he says, the rabbi says, well, can't you talk to this woman? Can't you end it? And then Martin Landau says, the woman won't allow it. Mm-hmm. And I think what's just so interesting is it's just this thing suddenly, like he's going, oh man, and I think the rabbi brings it up at a certain point, like, I'm done with this woman. Mm-hmm. But she's not going to let me be done with her. So his moral dilemma starts way back right there.
Yeah.
With his adultery, when he decided, I'm going to just use this person in the way that I want to use him. And then the rabbi says, sometimes he says, like, can't you confess to your wife? And he says, wisdom comes suddenly, because the guy says, like, I can't do this anymore. The rabbi says, wisdom comes suddenly. And then the rabbi says, just tell your wife. And, she might go for it. She might forgive you.
I think it's just confess the wrong and hope for understanding.
Yes, and hope for understanding. And then maybe you'll have a richer life. And then they have that first conversation where the rabbi says, I have to believe in a moral structure with meaning to give life meaning. Mm-hmm. And I think that begins the journey, if you will.
Well, he says... I had a note here. He says that we went, Judah says, we went from a small infidelity to the meaning of existence. And
right.
I remember thinking, well, from a Christian perspective, or, even a Jewish perspective here, they're related, that they're not entirely these two opposite sides of the spectrum. Every mm-hmm. small thing matters.
Small, yes. And they're all, in the law, they're in the 10 Commandments, like, I am God, and I which is like, I exist, which is his first question. And then not committing adultery is one of God's commands about how to get along with each other. If you don't do this, it's probably going to be it's going to be good for you. Believe me.
The rabbi's perspective is that, there is meaning in everything. And Landau's conclusion by the end of the film is there's really meaning in nothing, except for the personal meaning that we imbue with it. And you talking about the idea of the rabbi going blind by the end of the film, I think you're right that early on that's done as kind of there's sort of a moral significance to that, mm-hmm. that he's going blind, but he's able to see, whereas Landau is able to see, but he's blind morally or in some way. Yeah. But I think by the end of the film, it's more cynical, because by the end of the film, Alan is basically saying, well, this rabbi's gone blind because he doesn't really see the world for what it is. Because in Alan's perspective, Woody Allen's perspective, the world is this cold, empty, desolate, godless place. Landau mm-hmm. sees that for what it is, and he's able to move on with his life after he's done this horrible thing, because there is no ultimate justice or meaning. And so he finds meaning where he can find it.
So they can do anything because they don't think God is watching.
Yes.
Even though Martin Landau knows God is watching, but I don't want to, lead on to the next thing.
We can jump around. Actually, something that kind of came up there was, and I didn't really realize, I guess, that it is a theme in the film until you said that thing about blindness, but there's something that felt like a throwaway bit at the dinner table where he sort of has this sort of flashback to his family arguing about religion.
Yeah.
Landau does. And they have this there's this distinction made between God versus truth and logic. And I remember thinking, well, that's not really, first of all, it's not a relevant distinction. It also doesn't really seem to significant in the film, but I think maybe as it goes on, it does. But it felt like at the time it was just kind of Woody showing his hand a little bit. I mean, there's an assumption that there is necessarily a contradiction between God and truth.
Right. And he's always got, I think, Woody Allen, and you don't want to talk about a million other of his films. I think this is like his, I don't know, like 30th film, 20th or something. Anyway, he's always got like, it's usually a kind of a militant socialist woman that's in his movies. There's always someone that's kind of ranting and raving about how they don't believe in God. And this is no exception. But what's so cool is no matter what they're discussing, is they're around the table, they're eating together, they're discussing. Like, wouldn't you love to do that now with families? I mean, talking about the big stuff, it shaped him. Once again, that guy cannot escape what shaped him. And I think that's cool. And I think they do talk about science and God as if they're two different things. They do.
Yeah. Well, and I think this one thing that sort of comes out, which I think is, another, sort of a, false dichotomy. Well, there's this idea, I think, that you sometimes hear atheists talk about, like they're more courageous somehow because they can face a world without meaning. And but of course the problem with that is, like, if there's no meaning, then courage isn't even a virtue, and it's not deserving of praise. There's no deserving of praise for living a meaningless life.
Right.
So it's always sort of a very strange, because there is this idea that his father is arguing with his sister, who's the atheist, and the father says, if I'm wrong, I've lived a good life that felt meaningful and happy, and so what do I lose? And that's where I think Woody sets up this thing between God versus truth. But if you're wrong, well, you're blinded and deluded, but at least you're happy. But we atheists, we have to have the courage to face reality for what it is, and aren't we so brave for doing that? And it's like, well, I guess so, but it's not like that's in any way praiseworthy in your world, because bravery isn't a value.
Right, because you already said there weren't any. So why aren't you robbing banks and breaking into liquor stores all the time? Just do whatever you want then. But you don't. Why not? I don't know.
Yeah.
But it's Pascal's bargain, isn't it? The idea that, like, if it's true, it's awesome. If it's not, you lived a nice life. You don't lose. But if with atheism, you lose.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and it's possible you lose both ways. I mean, I know that there's, I guess, kind of different ways to look at it, but Paul says something to the effect of, if there isn't a resurrection, we may as well eat and drink, for tomorrow we die.
Right.
But on the other hand, we're fools. But on the other hand, sometimes, would you rather be a happy fool or a miserable wise person? And if there's no value in wisdom, then be the happy fool, I think.
Then be a happy fool. Right.
Yeah. By the end of the film, and this is obviously the ultimate spoiler, Landau's character has basically gotten away with it. Woody,
but before you get there, you have to back up, because he's still because he starts with the adultery, right?
Yes.
Then what's next with her? She's going to blackmail him, so he wants to pay her off. So now he's kind of prostituting her.
Yeah, there's something, I wish I would have, maybe I didn't write it down, but there's something about how one sin leads to another. Don't they say?
Yeah.
It does that at some point in the film.
Yeah, one thing, and it does with him, like, it just gets worse. So, the lying, then the infidelity, now he's trying to pay her off. Then he calls the brother.
Yeah. Yep.
And is looking for his brother. Remember when his brother keeps saying, what do you want? Why did you call me? So the brother's mixed up in the underworld, and he's like, why did you call me? And then Judah's kind of saying, like, oh, I don't know. Like, as the viewer, why he called him. He wants his brother to talk him into doing it.
Yeah, and he does this sort of tendency to put what he's done on other people. I've noticed where it's his brother, or it's this guy who killed, this guy is so terrible, he goes from place to place killing these people he doesn't know, that somehow that makes it worse than killing somebody that you've been intimate with.
I know, and he paid for it. Nothing gets done without the money.
Yeah.
So, ultimate justice. I'm sorry, I keep bringing you back away from it.
Well, actually, maybe it's better to step a little bit to it. So, I think it's interesting how Landau's character evolves. So, there's this place early on after he's done what he's done, and he has this deep sense of deserving punishment, and I think that's often our situation. We're confronted with our sin, and we have this deep sense of we deserve punishment. We've done something terrible, and then once you have some distance, you tend to rationalize it.
Uh-huh.
And so ultimately, if you're able to cope, the crime of murder is not any more distressing to the soul than any of the other minor crimes we commit through our lives. And so there's something, even though it's an extreme situation, I think there's something kind of universal to what Landau is doing there. We all sort of have to face our sins in a way, and he gets distance from it. He's not caught. And in contrast, you have Woody Allen's character who tries to do what he thinks, requires moral integrity, and he doesn't, do the film the way he's supposed to, and he makes it about how this film producer, or this television producer, is basically Mussolini, and he's a cad and that kind of thing, and so he feels like he's done the right thing, but then of course he doesn't get the girl, the brother-in-law gets the girl, and so there's this idea that Landau gets away with it, and when he does what's wrong. And Woody's character tries to do what's right, and he's punished.
Right.
And so there's that question too. What's integrity worth if there is no ultimate purpose?
Right. And I would even say though with Woody Allen, like he tried to do what was right. What, by making the documentary the way he wanted to.
Well, I think he felt that he was doing it with integrity. So he was trying to stay consistent with his values and not selling out. Whereas, his brother-in-law just basically does whatever he needs to do to succeed in life, which is, in a way, Alan Alda's kind of a mirror image of Martin Landau. Alan Alda doesn't kill anybody. He does sort of, fluffy television stuff that doesn't really hurt anybody necessarily. But ultimately, what they're trying to do is just be successful and wealthy in life, and they don't have to really be concerned about integrity or quality.
He's a huge cad. But I would say, with that, I think that Woody Allen's character doing the documentary the way he knows no one is going to want, I think there's just a certain self-centeredness in that like, I am this artist, and
yes,
I'm not interested in money, but he's interested in being navel gazing and doing his own thing. But he's jealous of the other guy's success, and he wants the same woman he wants. So he ultimately wants the same things too. He wants the spoils of life. And then the guy that he's doing the documentary on, I think this is just kind of interesting. He's not wise at all.
Mm-hmm. You talking about the rabbi?
Levy? No, Dr. Levy, the guy that Woody Allen's really doing the documentary about.
Professor. Yeah, he's doing
Professor Levy.
Yeah.
He says some of the stupidest stuff. I wrote it down. I wonder if we can find it. But like, he's not wise. He's interesting and eccentric, but he's not wise.
Well, yeah, I think that they've used the professor. Alan is doing two different documentaries. One for money about Alan Alda's character, another one about this professor.
Yeah.
And his words are kind of like what you leave at the end of the movie with, and he says something to the effect of, you make your own happiness and you find joy in the simple things, which is kind of like,
yes,
Woody Allen's supposed to be trying to sort of have an optimistic ending. Okay, sure, life is meaningless and murder is, no better than, no worse than anything else. But,
right.
You make your own happiness and you find joy in the simple things. And that's kind of life affirming, isn't it?
I guess.
Yeah.
So, okay, here it is. He says, one of the things that this Professor Leary says, he says, where is it? No matter what your remember, he goes, no matter what your philosophical system you work out, you have to find something to make you happy. But he's just saying, like, you just work out your own philosophical system and then that will make you happy.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously doesn't, because he commits suicide, which is, kind of it's sad and ironic and everything in the movie. But I'm not exactly sure what he was trying to say with that character committing suicide.
Yeah, I mean, I guess, that's kind of interesting. I mean, yeah, so obviously this character is supposed to be kind of life affirming and wise or whatever, but he ends up committing suicide because he still feels like something's missing and he can't quite, I don't know, I guess he faces down the meaninglessness of life, and
kills himself. Yeah.
Yeah, all his philosophy is not really enough to get him all the way. Which,
Right.
I mean,
He says the universe is a pretty cold place, but we infuse it with meaning and feelings. And then no matter what your philosophical system you work out, yeah, it's kind of interesting.
yeah, well, maybe in a way he's a symbol for the effort that is the film itself. It's life is meaningless, but let's find some meaning anyway and do what we can, and then you ultimately that's not tenable.
Right. Right.
So you end up having to kill yourself.
Yeah, yes, I know. It's so sad. Okay, so are you going to, can I ask you something?
Yeah.
So he's doing the Alan Alda character, who I think is the best acting in the film. He's hilarious.
Oh, he's great.
He's smug
If it bends, it's funny. If it breaks, it's not funny.
Okay, so that's what I was going to ask you. What do you think of that as a philosophy? What do you think? And then history plus time equals comedy.
Or tragedy plus time equals
yes,
time.
tragedy. Sorry, tragedy plus time equals comedy. What do you think of those two things? I'm turning the tables on you.
Yeah, I mean, I don't entirely disagree. I mean, I think they're kind of, I think Woody Allen is trying to sort of put these things out there that are kind of cliches.
Right.
So that, I think Alan Alda delivers them as if they're, very, unique insights that no one has ever said before.
Right.
But they're not entirely untrue.
Yes, that's what I think. It's kind of interesting because they're hackneyed, but it's kind of true. But I just think it's so funny how Alan Alda is just trying to make these like huge points, and Woody Allen's just he's rolling his eyes. That's some of the best stuff.
Yeah.
Because I just think it's so funny. But I still think he should have made the film he was supposed to make as well as he could have for the purposes, because he had his passionate project on the other side, and I think it just shows the smallness of that person's of that character's character.
Yeah, well, he is small in a way because ultimately Alan Alda is kind of likable. I mean, Alan Alda doesn't play the character as entirely terrible. I mean, there are times where you like him a lot more than you like Woody Allen's character. But I think there's this. I guess when I say that Alan's character is trying to live with integrity, obviously that's not consistent because he's wanting to try to have an affair on his wife, and he's he agrees to do this documentary, and he does it a way that he's not supposed to, that he knows that people who are paying him don't want him to do it that way,
right?
And so he's not really living with integrity, but he has this small sense of this very small scope of what he thinks integrity is, and he tries to live according to that. And I kind of got the sense that was supposed to be the message at the end, that Woody's character tries to do what's right, he's punished, and Landau does what's wrong, and he prospers.
Right.
So obviously if there's no God, then Landau does get away with it. Whereas if Woody would have done, sold himself out, he might have gotten the girl, and he might have been successful, and that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. But at the end, remember, doesn't Martin Landau says, I worried about it for a while, and then one day, I didn't think about it anymore.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and he says it's something that maybe it might come to you every now and then, and it might bother you, but you'll get over it. It's kind of like thinking about something embarrassing you said, to somebody one time that you wished you hadn't.
Totally, Cody. I was totally thinking of that same example, and the little things, and like how the time maybe you would say that thing, and then you'd call that person up and apologize. And how good you feel about it yourself, but then how much kind of good it's the right thing to do because you've wronged someone. And so in a sense, it exists no more because it's been confessed and forgiven generally on those small social sins. And that it exists no more. And that's what the rabbi was trying to have happen at the very beginning. Just tell her.
Yeah.
And you may luck out, you may not, but you'll have a richer life. And then after the heinous murder, which is just awful, then he's thinking about confessing. And then his brother was like, no, the time to confess was way back when with Miriam, when you did this, not now. Yeah. Even though as a Christian, as a believer in God, Christian, whoever, anytime's the right time to confess. but he's going to bring everybody down with him now.
Because he wants to live the life he wants to live, regardless of, he doesn't want to face the consequences of what he's done. He'll do what he wants to do, and then he'll make it work.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's terrifying.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, I watched the movie with my wife, and she's really gotten into a lot of Woody Allen movies, but this is one she hadn't seen all the way through.
Mm-hmm. It's because you get it. What kind of upsets you is you get worried that he's going to get caught. He killed a woman, which is horrible, and you should be hoping he gets caught, and yet you kind of go like, oh no, don't get caught now, don't go back to her apartment, what are you doing? And then I'm saying to myself, no, he should get caught. It's terrible.
Yeah,
but we all want to like the nice guy because he's a pretty good guy in every other way.
Well, I think that's the thing about film too, is you always want to empathize with the protagonist, because you see the film through his perspective or her perspective. Right. And the danger of that sometimes is that you begin to empathize with things you shouldn't.
No, I know, and she's laying there dead, but then the other hard thing is she's annoying.
Yeah.
And
so maybe it's okay.
Isn't it hard? Because she's annoying. Just exactly how she's become annoying to him. She's annoying to the audience. And I think Angelica Houston does a nice job as that character.
Yeah. And okay, so this is totally off topic. I didn't realize until like a couple of years ago that Angelica Houston is John Huston's daughter.
Oh, wow. Right. Yeah.
So did you already know that? Did you know that already?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I felt like an idiot. I was like, oh, how did I not know that? All right.
And the little girl in this movie that he takes to the movies, his niece, is Mike Nichols' daughter.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
I didn't know that. Yeah, she's really great in this too, actually.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I like the kind of the relationship he has with his niece. They kind of go out to movies, and there's kind of a paternal sort of relationship, but it's also kind of childlike in a way.
Yeah, I think it's all fine until you know about Woody Allen's personal life. Like I can't abide it.
Yeah, so there is that. Okay, so there are certain things that you see, especially leading up to all the different things, where it becomes harder to watch because you think about the least and so obviously there's the thing with Mia's adopted
right and
daughter who he marries,
right.
And so that's obviously inappropriate and weird, but not illegal or anything. But then there's the other charges, which maybe this is an interesting thing to talk about, which is.
Well, I don't know. I'd rather not. It's such a savory topic.
It is.
All I'm saying is you start to think about that when you see his film. So like when I was watching this for our discussion, I kind of had to just say, I'm not going to think about that stuff.
Yes.
I'm just going to try and think about this story as presented as a finished film without me knowing who the filmmaker is.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I don't really watch I wouldn't seek out his stuff anymore because I've seen it all.
Mm-hmm.
Although, like new stuff, I probably wouldn't go to see anything new. I don't know. I don't know about that, but I tried not to. And then there's that other unsavory thing in this about that whole thing with his sister and that horrible man. And I just thought, you don't even have to talk about it because it doesn't really have a lot for us to discuss.
I understand. Yeah. Well, and I wasn't really planning on going anywhere with that because it feels like a separate issue. And it's bothersome.
Totally, yeah.
I did. So one thing that I think does come through as you're watching, everything that he did before, what he's accused of, whatever, is you see it through a new light, right? It may have not meant anything at that point, but and the thing I remember thinking was, if Woody Allen, believes this sort of nihilistic worldview wholeheartedly, then he's exactly the kind of person that could do something really totally terrible and just go on with his life. Right.
And I sometimes feel like this movie was a turning point for him. I mean, obviously, what the heck do I know? He could tune into our podcast and go, what the, they don't know what they're talking about. But it feels like to me like he was working something out in this movie, and he kind of decided, you do what you do. I mean, I
Yeah.
think he said, the heart wants what it wants. Well, boy, we
Yeah.
know as Christians, the heart is deceitful above all things,
Yeah.
and it will take you places that are bad.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And yeah, absolutely.
I think we've touched on a lot of the big topics, the God topics and things. I always love his takes to the camera and when he's just doing his deadpan face.
Uh-huh.
I loved the scene. I love when he says he's watching the movie with her, reel by reel, they're eating the Chinese food together. And then he's like, I've taken an instant liking to you. And then she says, and I to him about the film they're watching. And
Oh
he
yeah, but
looks at the
professor.
camera like, what the heck?
Yeah.
They're like, wah, wah, Charlie Brown, he loses again.
Yeah, and you know what? I enjoy all these sort of different genres and stuff that he plays with, but I have to say that I kind of like shticky Woody Allen.
Yeah,
he has a special place in my heart.
Yeah, totally. When he's funny, he is so funny.
Yeah, Take the Money and Run is just one of those that is just kind of consistently hilarious. And there's even some of the later ones that people don't like a lot. My wife's, one of her favorites is one that he did.
What's your wife's name?
Oh, Raven.
Raven. Hi, Raven.
Okay, so what was I going to say? Okay, we're talking about Sticky Woody Allen. I was saying, okay, so one of my wife's favorite Woody Allen films is a film called Small Time Crooks that he did with Tracy Ullman.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, everybody else hates it, but we think it's really good.
That's funny. And then I love Radio Days.
Oh, yes. Yeah. That and Small Time Crooks, I think, are my wife's favorites.
Yeah, I just love Radio Days. I think that's when he's at his very best. Because it's just funny and the nostalgia is good. And I also like the Paris movie with the Owen brother playing Woody Allen.
Yeah, Midnight in Paris.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, that's a great one too. That reminds me a lot of Purple Rose of Cairo, because it's kind of this idea of creating this kind of perfect world that, once you're in it, you realize it's not all that it is, all that it seems.
Right.
It's a little different because I guess Purple Rose of Cairo, she comes back to it in a sense. She wants to go into it and then decides not to because it's not real. But then she still finds that there's something attractive to that, which is, it's about film. You find these movies that touch you in a certain way, and they're better than reality.
Right. And yes, and that one is more about film, and then Midnight in Paris is about nostalgia and the danger of nostalgia.
Yes. Yeah. So
it is a dangerous thing because nostalgia is always kind of a sadness, and it's that longing for something that was, and as Christians, we know that longing that we all have is really because we're not really at home here. As C.S. Lewis says, we're longing for heaven, but nostalgia is knowing that and allowing yourself to forget it as a Christian. I think it's a dangerous thing for Christians to get nostalgic. We're always called to be living right in the moment that we're at for the hope for, our eternity, and nostalgia is bad.
Well, I
it's not memory. It's not remembering like you do, like remember what our forefathers did for us, or that's different. Yeah. It's that whimsy, We've really focused just on the one story for the most part, the murder. Yeah. But to me, that's the story. That's the big story. But at one point they say God is a luxury I can't afford.
Wow.
And they're right. If they they think they're getting away from judgment, because then they also say, you don't think God sees? So they're really stuck between those two things.
Yes.
And then just the idea of, I just couldn't stop thinking the whole time, is like, if he had just at the very beginning confessed to the small thing, all this thing wouldn't have unraveled. And it's really his pride causes him to think that his pride makes him think his wife can't forgive. And he doesn't know what's in her heart.
Well, ultimately, I think whether he because you don't really know a lot about her because she's not really. I mean, she's not really a character. She's kind of more of a device. You
Yeah.
know that she's there, but um,
But it doesn't matter because you see the life that he's built, and she's part of that.
yeah,
The
that's true.
kids and their nice sweatery life and their fires and the fireplace and their cocktails and like she's part of that, and he couldn't have done that without her.
Yeah. Well, but I think regardless of whether he knows how she'll react or not, I think what you sort of get what comes across is he doesn't want to be bothered, and I
Right.
think he's built a certain life and he's cut corners when he's had to get to where he is, and we do that. We don't want to be bothered with having integrity,
Right.
um,
Right.
because that gets in the way of what we need, and which I think is maybe the point of the film. We don't want to be bothered with integrity because it gets in the way of what we want,
Mm-hmm.
um, which is pretty awful.
Yeah. Yeah. Because whenever we make moral compromises, don't you think it's exactly that?
Yes, I would say so, and yeah, and I don't and really buy. There's something I think that's kind of troubling, although I think it's consistent from an atheistic perspective, that um, Woody Allen's story, or the character, the story of his character, and the story of Martin Landau's character are really parallel stories in a way. This
Mm-hmm.
idea that because Woody Allen's character made his brother-in-law look like Mussolini, yeah, he's taken the moral high ground somehow, and that was sort of like that was like his decision not to kill his mistress. You know what I mean? It was like they're
Yeah.
somehow equivalent.
Yeah.
But obviously, from an atheistic perspective, the difference between those two things is subjective. Somebody might see them as significant because that's just how they see the world.
Mm-hmm.
But somebody might see it very differently, as the Martin Landau's character does.
Right. Right. But I don't you think that Martin Landau's character Judah, which I think is an interesting name, that he picks like the name of the main son, Judah, and that he just picked such a strong name for that guy, leader, everything. He knows. I just don't think that he's ever going to escape his guilt. I think if you were to, this is real life and life went on, I think he'd confess. I think it'd be a deathbed confession.
Yeah, well, so I mean, yeah, and obviously this is Crime and Punishment turned on its head. It's
Right.
Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment.
Is it?
Well, basically, but turned on its head. So there are certain parallel characters that run throughout, but there's the basic idea of
That's a big long book that I never have read.
yes, it would be lacking of integrity for me to say that I have read it. But I've seen a couple film adaptations, and I looked at the Wikipedia page last night.
Sure.
So
Right.
but yeah, there are some parallel characters, but the basic idea of the man who commits the crime, thinking he's going to get away with it, that he can handle the weight of the guilt, and
Right.
it doesn't work out.
No, it never works out. I can't. I mean, I never even shoplifted anything because I would die of yeah. I'm terrible. I stole some shirts from. I'm telling everyone now. I stole some shirts out of a locker from an opposing basketball team, and I thought about it for years later.
Yeah, I used to.
Take it.
I used to, when I was, a teenage atheist. I was a teenage atheist. That sounds
Oh my God, that's a
something
great
Mystery
movie.
Science Theater would do.
Yes.
I thought it was really cool, and I was thought of myself as very. I think I thought that I was. It's kind of like the Midnight in Paris. I was born in the wrong era. I thought of myself as a '60s radical.
Sure.
I would have hung out with Abby Hoffman or whatever.
Right.
And so I thought, oh, I'm gonna shoplift from my local grocery store here and there. And
Right.
then I became a Christian, and I heard about restitution, and I went back and gave them money for the things I'd stolen. Because after there's a time where I think it does, but
Wow, that's
maybe,
cool.
but maybe not for everybody though. I mean, certainly there are people who hitmen who go to their graves and they don't confess, but do they live a quality life? What's their inner life really like?
Oh gosh, they don't know.
It's troubling because I assume that on some level you're able to cope, because I don't know, maybe not everybody, but
No,
on
I
some
couldn't
level,
do
I
it.
think
I'd like
so.
try and get a normal life at work at a dry cleaner, and I'd bring someone their shirt, and I'd be like, "Here's your shirt." I killed someone. I would just tell people I couldn't hold it in. I'd be a bad criminal.
So, what are, do you have any final thoughts before we sign off? And I will mention again all the cool stuff you're working on.
Okay. No, the other kind of just interesting thing I thought was it ended at the wedding banquet of the bride. That at the end of in Revelation, there's a big celebration at the end. There's a wedding, and I thought it was interesting that their moral lives kind of ended and began at this wedding. They go their ways. It's over.
Yeah,
it's chosen. It's done. And I'm pretty sure he didn't do that on purpose, but I thought it was kind of a fun thing for us to think about.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. So yeah, Revelation ends with judgment and a wedding, and Crimes and Misdemeanors just ends with a wedding.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
they decided there isn't a judgment.
Yeah, and that's the good news. So if you've done something terrible, that's the good news. So just want to mention again. So people who've enjoyed this conversation and enjoyed what you had to say. One thing they can check out is your podcast instead of tweeting.
Yes, it's only a minute at a time. I mean, anyone can listen to this. You will not. I mean, it's over before it begins. The credits are as long as the content.
Sure, and the idea is instead of tweeting, you deliver a short pod. You have to hear it to understand the title. It's one of those complicated things. And also you've been doing a lot of especially shorts, and also some features for Rifftrax.
Yes, monthly.
Yeah,
monthly.
Mm-hmm. One just came out, or at least in like the last week or so.
It did. What was it? I can't remember what it was. But coming up very soon for Thanksgiving is Let's Talk Turkey, a half-hour short about how you can cook a turkey. I have written so many jokes about turkeys. This is like the third time I've written a whole entire short movie about turkeys.
So it's a favorite subject of yours.
Yes, I guess it is, but it's my Thanksgiving special. And then coming up for Christmas, Mary Jo and I will be riffing the 1940 classic. It's called Beyond Christmas, original title Beyond Tomorrow, starring Hollywood actor and Minnesotan Richard Carlson.
Wow. Okay, that's awesome. And for people who are familiar with Mystery Science Theater, Mary Jo was on the show. So she was early on, she'd be coming as like Jan in the Pan. And then she ends up having a larger role later on as Pearl Forrester.
Yes. And she was a longtime writer and very funny person and friend of mine and writing partner. And she's wunderbar.
That's awesome. Okay, and it's occurred to me, and I keep forgetting to do this, I am terrible at self-promotion. So I'm going to mention my website, cantusfirmus.com. That's cantus-firmus.com. There's also a Facebook page that I don't think I've ever mentioned. And I also have a number of books that you can read for free at cantusfirmus.com. There's also links to where you can get them on Amazon. So check those out if you have any interest as well. And
what does Cantus Firmus mean?
Okay, so I took it from a line that Bonhoeffer has in one of his letters that he wrote when he's in prison. So the Cantus Firmus is the central melody that all the other melodies sort of build around. So it's the idea that Jesus is the central melody, and that we sort of arrange everything else in life around Jesus.
Ooh, I like that. That.
So whether
I should have asked Mike. So whether it's what?
Also, I was just saying, whether it's my interest in films, or whether it's your love for your family or whatever, all of that is meant to complement the central melody that is Christ.
Oh, that's lovely.
Yeah, I think it sounds nice, but it's of course hard to remember, and people don't always know how to spell it. So it was a terrible choice for a website address.
Well, that's okay. I mean, Bonhoeffer's so cool. So that's this beautiful thought he had, and he was plotting to kill Hitler, which is like so awesome. He was the best.
Yeah, he's amazing to read if you
I love him.
If you've never read him before. But yeah, okay, awesome. Okay, thank you everyone for listening, and make sure you check out Rifftrax and Instead of Tweeting.